The laugh told me more than any report ever had. Because when Jason stood at the lip of the stage and tossed out that breezy line about blueberry pancakes after a 2 a.m. deploy, the room cracked into friendly applause while my chest went cold. Since that phrase did not live in our slide decks or our Slack threads or our Tuesday stand-ups, it lived in the quiet blue of our kitchen when the city slept and Olivia leaned against the counter with tired wrists and said it like a small reward for getting through something hard together. And I watched him grin at the crowd and spin a story that sounded astonishingly familiar, while Olivia, 2 seats over with her, tablet hugged to her ribs like a shield, smiled a little too carefully without turning her head toward me even once, which was how I knew that whatever was wrong was not a momentary flicker but a current. And I tried to breathe in that stiff conference air and act like a normal colleague on a normal morning, writing down a question I did not need to ask about cue depth so my hands would have a place to go. And when the rehearsal broke for coffee, she came near with the polished project tone. That makes everything sound harmless, and said, "How did the numbers feel from your side, Ethan? Because if the latency curve holds like the last soak, we might finally be able to say yes." And I answered that the curve would hold if we stopped pretending the cash was magic and tuned the pre-warm schedule like adults. Then I tilted the conversation a degree, so small no one would notice, and said, "Blueberry pancakes, huh? Big fan of breakfast metaphors these days," which is when her smile stalled for half a heartbeat while her eyes didn't quite find mine, and she laughed with an extra brightness that sounded like glass and said, "Jason loves food jokes. Don't encourage him, or he'll turn the whole thing into a diner menu." And I nodded the way you nod when you step into water you know will be cold and you refuse to flinch. Then I turned to Jason and asked a question that pretended to be about back pressure thresholds while he poured on Easy Charm. And he said, "We're golden if we don't. Baby the consumers," which made Olivia's shoulders loosen in a way that should have made me proud and instead made me want to peel the paint off the walls with my fingernails. Yet I kept my posture and my reasonable tone because reputations die in loud rooms, not quiet ones. I did not stage a scene or demand the truth across a glass table, because I have seen how a single dramatic afternoon becomes the only thing people remember about you. So I build a plan the way I build systems, with steps that look boring until they become inevitable. And I started by asking facilities for a 30-day dump of door access logs to the media room under a tidy pretext about auditing traffic before the executive preview, then wandered by the AV desk to compliment the new mixer, while learning, without learning, that a single red button would capture the room feed when the hot run began, and all afternoon I wore the face I have perfected for incidents, the one that says we will do the necessary work and we will not panic, even though panic was lifting its head like a wild animal inside me. And when we finally went home, the apartment carried the citrus cleaner she liked and the faint trace of a perfume she swore no one else could detect, and she set her bag down as if it were heavier than fabric and leaned against the counter with the kind of tired that asks for gentleness, telling me that the rehearsal went fine and the executive floor would dial in tomorrow, then asking in a voice that wanted to be casual whether I thought the opening story landed. And I said the story landed because people like to be fed, and we had fed them. And she stepped closer in that slow way that used to mean nothing but comfort while she brushed my shoulder with her fingertips, which sent a spark across skin that I pretended not to feel, because even desire can be a kind of misdirection when you need your head clear. And she said, "You know I'm running on fumes. If we nail this tomorrow, I'll sleep all weekend." And I said, with more softness than I intended, that I hoped she would. And the look she gave me was warm and complicated and not quite steady. The kind of look that can either pull 2 people back together or push them quietly apart. And later, when the apartment finally stilled, I lay awake thinking about that laugh and that line, and the way her hand lingered a second too long on his sleeve before she remembered to move it. And I told myself that suspicion without proof is just weather, but a recording is a map. So the next morning I arrived early enough to watch the AV team uncoil cables like vines and clip bright mics to collars. And the text said to leave them on through the break because the executive floor might call in at any moment. And little red lights blinked awake like eyes that do not forgive, while Jason rolled his shoulders and practiced his opening cadence one more time, and Olivia adjusted a bullet point and rested her palm on his shoulder for the length of a breath, then pulled back with a guilty flinch that cut through me more cleanly than anger. Yet I sat down like an obedient colleague and asked a question about message ordering because theater is part of survival. And when the rehearsal ended and the room spilled into side conversations, I drifted toward the mixer and pressed the harmless red circle with a thumb that did not shake. Then stepped into the hallway to breathe and found, as the door clicked behind me, that someone had left one channel live, because their voices floated into the corridor as if the ceiling had learned to speak, and I heard Jason murmur, in that intimate register people use when they believe the world has turned its head. "Baby, last night was unreal and I cannot keep my hands to myself when you stand this close." And I stood very still while the air seemed to change density, and my phone's recorder drew a wave across the screen, and then I heard Olivia's voice, low and smiling and careful, say, "Then you will have to try, because if Ethan walks and we are finished, and I am not ready to lose what we built." And with that one sentence, the shape of my life redrew itself with brutal clarity, not with shouting or slammed doors or dramatic exits, but with a live microphone and two people who forgot the room was still listening. And I understood that whatever happened next needed to be clean and patient and undeniable. Because the difference between anger and justice is the work you do in the quiet minutes when no one is watching. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the collapse of certainty. And that is exactly what followed me out of that hallway as I replayed Olivia's voice over and over, each word slicing deeper, because it wasn't just the intimacy that gutted me, it was the calm calculation behind it, the way she said she wasn't ready to lose what they built, as if their secret connection meant more to her than the years we spent choosing furniture, building routines, and pretending to be the kind of couple people envied. And I walked back into the conference room like a ghost checking on the living, watching how easily she leaned over Jason's laptop to adjust a slide while he smirked like the world belonged to him. And somehow everyone around them stayed blind, because betrayal rarely looks dramatic to outsiders. It looks like teamwork. It looks like inside jokes. It looks like trust. And I kept thinking that if I confronted them right then, nothing would really happen except they would lie, get defensive, maybe even make me look paranoid. So instead, I thanked the AV tech, packed my laptop with steady fingers, and told the team I had to prep my own part of the presentation, which was true, just not in the way they expected. I spent the rest of the afternoon buried in metrics I barely saw, pretending to analyze data while my real focus tunneled inward, sorting through memories like files in a cabinet I hadn't opened in years. Little moments that suddenly felt different in hindsight, like the weekend she claimed she had to work late and came home smelling like expensive cologne she said was from a client shaking her hand, or the time Jason joked that Olivia had the best way of making tension disappear, and everyone laughed like it was harmless, including me, because I trusted her so completely that I never considered the possibility that the punchline was real. And the more I sifted through those fragments, the more I realized this wasn't something new. It had history, texture, layers I hadn't seen because I didn't want to, and that hurt even more than the recording itself. By the time I drove home, the sunset looked too soft and beautiful for the ugliness sitting in my chest, and the steering wheel felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone who hadn't just listened to his life breaking with crystal clarity through company audio equipment. And when I pulled into the garage, I sat there long enough for the engine to cool beneath my hands, trying to decide whether to go inside like nothing had changed or walk away and never come back. But I walked in because I needed to see her the way she was when she didn't know I knew. She was at the stove stirring pasta, humming under her breath, wearing one of my old t-shirts like she always did on relaxed nights. And the familiarity of it nearly broke me in half. She smiled when she saw me, not guilty or nervous, just warm and tired and real. And that was when the second wave of betrayal hit. Because she didn't look like a villain, she looked like the person I trusted more than anyone on earth. And realizing those two versions of her could exist in the same body made the ground under me feel unstable. She asked about my day. I said the rehearsal went fine, and she said Jason was brilliant as always, then added in this soft, admiring tone that his presence made her feel calm, and I swallowed the burn in my throat and said he was talented, but talented people can still destroy everything if no one checks them. And she laughed like it was just banter, then touched my arm gently in a way that normally settled my nerves, but now felt like someone else wearing her skin. We ate dinner like a normal couple, talked about trivial things, even watched a show she loved, but I barely registered the dialogue because I couldn't stop studying her movements, The way she tucked her hair behind her ear with the same hand that probably touched him. The way she curled into me on the couch and rested her head on my shoulder like I was still her safe place. And I let her, because I needed to understand how deep this went, how long she had been living two lives without slipping. And there was one moment where she shifted and her breath brushed against my neck, warm and familiar, and every inch of me reacted with muscle memory, wanting her despite everything, which made me hate myself for still loving someone capable of this kind of deception. When we finally went to bed, she fell asleep within minutes, breathing slow and even, while I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easy it would be to shake her awake and demand the truth. But I didn't, because spontaneous fury only satisfies emotion, not justice, and I needed justice. Sometime around 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and went to the living room, where the city lights turned the windows into pale ghosts, and I opened my laptop not to distract myself, but to begin. First, I saved the recording from my phone in 3 different places: a hidden folder on my personal drive, an encrypted cloud account, and a spare flash drive I labeled with a fake work report. Then, I made a list of everywhere I had seen Olivia and Jason together outside of formal meetings, team lunches, weekend planning sessions, off-site brainstorming, even trips where she said the company needed 2 reps, and I cross-referenced them with travel logs in my email archives, realizing with a sickening clarity that they had shared hotel cities at least 4 times in the past 6 months. Then I made another list: people she trusted, people who might have seen something, people who could confirm timelines without suspecting why, and most importantly, access points, security cameras, badge logs, calendar invites. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing a case. By the time dawn started bleeding into the sky, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not confront her until I had enough proof to make the truth undeniable, not just to her, but to everyone. This could not be a private argument. This had to be an unmasking. And as the light crept through the curtains, I heard her stir in the bedroom, stretching with that soft little exhale she always made in the morning. And for a brief second, I almost felt the urge to climb back into bed, hold her, pretend none of this was real. But then I remembered Jason's voice whispering, "Baby," and Olivia warning him about me like I was just an obstacle, not her husband, and the softness inside me froze solid. I stood up, closed the laptop, and made myself a promise as clear and cold as glass. If she wanted to build something behind my back, I would dismantle it in front of the world. I pressed play, and the hallway footage rearranged my life into something with edges I could follow, because there they were in a grainy strip of light. Olivia in a spring coat checking her phone with the kind of private smile that used to belong only to our apartment, and Jason arriving a few minutes later with that easy, practiced posture people use when they have someone in their corner, and the way he leaned in to speak to her. The way she answered with that soft, low laugh that had never been for me when it was meant for him, made the world feel not broken but exposed, as if I had been looking at a laminated map and suddenly the routes on it were red. I moved like someone who had decided not to be dramatic because drama feeds gossip and gossip suffocates clarity. I asked the facilities team for retention policies under the banal pretense of an audit and learned from the security manager in a long, patient conversation exactly which servers kept video longer than the rest and which folders were easy to export. And I sat that night with my laptop at the kitchen table and saved files in 3 different places and labeled them with dates and decoy project names so my own head would not betray the plan in a moment of careless anger, because this was not about scoring points. It was about ending something that had been built on a series of small permissions. When I spoke with Natalie from the product group, I did not say, "Are they together?" because that sounds like accusation and invites denials. Instead, I leaned on the counter and asked in a long, measured way that forced a thoughtful answer. "Natalie, I'm reconciling floor presence for next quarter, and I want a clear sense of whether anyone on Olivia's team has been leaving at odd hours or taking meetings offsite that aren't on public calendars. Because if we have an inconsistency, I need to document it for continuity." And Natalie, who always looked like someone who calculated consequences before she spoke, told a story that began with an ordinary Tuesday and unfolded into a detail about Olivia slipping out after a late review and a taxi receipt that did not match any client meeting, and she spoke in a way that sounded like she was letting me into something she had shelved rather than confessing. And the long answer made the pattern feel less like coincidence and more like a deliberate architecture of excuses. I built timelines in that way, collecting badge swipes, calendar entries, expense reports and cross-referencing them, so the overlaps became a line I could point to, because secrets create records the way any living thing leaves tracks, and once you know how to read them, they are unambiguous. There were moments when the work felt surgical, a cold precision that protected me from making a scene that would be easier to witness than to win, and when I watched a clip of them in the empty break room, my hands tightened on the mouse, because Jason reached for a sugar packet and Olivia touched his wrist with a gesture that in any other life would be nothing but concern. And I heard myself whispering facts into the empty room as if rehearsing testimony, speaking in long sentences that pulled the chronology together with a voice that tried to be both angry and methodical. I did not confront Olivia that week because confrontation is an event and events can be spun into parables that erase nuance. Instead, I arranged for a subtle change to the all-hands agenda that allowed me a short, unremarkable slot, and I started to prepare a presentation that would not sensationalize but would be impossible to deny. Time-stamped clips, badge logs with names and times, travel receipts with match nights, emails with subject lines that hinted at late follow-ups, but in which the metadata told the real story, and I practiced the flow of it until the lines in my head read like evidence rather than vengeance. There were long, private moments where desire made the work harder because Olivia's familiar scent would still hang in the apartment when she returned, and she would curl into me on the couch with a casual intimacy that sharpened my resolve rather than broke it, because wanting someone who had been duplicating your life feels like complicity with your own erasure. And in those moments, I spoke to the dark of the apartment in protracted thoughts about the difference between anger and justice, about the way a good, clinical unveiling can close a wound cleanly instead of leaving it to fester. I learned the language of proof the way I once learned a programming framework, by doing the boring piece after piece until a structure emerges. And in the quiet hours before the meeting, I copied files to a secure drive, wrote a narrative that matched the timestamps, and rehearsed a long opening line that would not shout, but would make everything visible. Because the aim was not to humiliate for humiliation's sake, but to remove the shelter where their secret had been living so it could not continue to live in the bones of my life or in the rhythms of the office. The morning of the executive rehearsal felt like standing at the edge of a cliff pretending I was just enjoying the view, because on the surface everything was routine. Coffee in generic paper cups, the click of keyboards, polite chatter about server utilization. Yet under my skin there was a hum like electricity, a warning that something was about to shift. And I kept my posture relaxed so no one would suspect that the presentation I was about to witness mattered less to me than the two people delivering it. Olivia walked in wearing the soft gray blazer I once told her made her look invincible, and for a split second I saw the woman I had built a home with. The woman whose laughter used to light up the room before I discovered that same laughter in places I wasn't invited. Then Jason appeared beside her with that confident stride that made everyone assume competence without question. And when they stood shoulder to shoulder going over notes, they looked like a perfectly synchronized team, too. Synchronized, almost rehearsed in ways meetings don't require. I took a seat near the back and pretended to review my slides, but my eyes kept tracing the curve of her hand as it brushed too close to his, the subtle lean of her body when he whispered something to her. And it was surreal how easily they performed innocence when I was holding receipts that proved the opposite. The AV tech tested microphones, reminding everyone to leave them on throughout the run in case the executive floor dialed in early, and my heart gave a slow, dangerous beat because I knew the power of an open mic better than anyone in that room. This time I wasn't just a witness, I was ready. As the run began, Olivia spoke first with the calm authority I always admired, explaining the system redesign with clear logic, and the team nodded along, completely oblivious to the fact that the person they trusted most was building her brilliance on betrayal. Then Jason took over with that smooth cadence that made his ideas sound effortless, and he peppered in another one of their private phrases, "Don't poke the bear unless you're ready to feed it." A line Olivia used to say jokingly when I worked late, and she wanted me to eat something before I snapped at the code, and that phrase didn't belong in a corporate pitch. It belonged in our kitchen at midnight when she teased me while handing me takeout. But there it was, coming out of his mouth without hesitation, and Olivia didn't even flinch, just smiled in quiet acknowledgement. as if they had earned the right to share something sacred. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay still, because reacting too soon would only ruin what was coming. Let them feel comfortable. Let them feel untouchable. Let them hand me their own rope. When the rehearsal ended and the room emptied into the hallway, I stayed behind to check my notes, but really I was watching them through the reflection in the conference room glass. They lingered a little longer than necessary, Olivia leaning in just slightly while Jason spoke, and then she touched his arm in a way that wasn't overtly intimate, but wasn't professional either, and that tiny gesture made something in me settle, not explode, but settle, because it confirmed everything beyond emotional doubt. They left the room together, and I waited 10 long seconds before following, just in time to see them turn down the side corridor that led not to the main elevators, but to the back stairwell. That was all I needed to see. I spent the rest of the day fine-tuning the presentation template for the all-hands meeting, making minor revisions on paper while constructing a completely different show in my head. My official topic was cross-team efficiency and process accountability, which was innocuous enough that no one questioned why I wanted a few minutes on the agenda, and the department manager approved it without hesitation. Ironically, the same man I would later discover was also tangled in Olivia's web. The hypocrisy of it all might have been amusing if it hadn't been my life. After securing my slot, I reached out to the AV lead under the guise of wanting to ensure my presentation flowed smoothly with the transitions, and in that conversation, I confirmed the exact timing of media handoffs, how long each speaker had the floor, and most importantly, when the screen could be fully mine without interference. I didn't tell him what I planned to show, just that I needed audio enabled for a short internal clip for transparency training. He agreed without blinking. That night at home, Olivia was unusually affectionate, draping herself over me on the couch while we watched TV, her fingers tracing patterns on my arm like they used to when she wanted comfort or closeness. It felt almost cruel how natural it was, like muscle memory, and for a moment I wondered if she even fully understood what she was doing to me, or if she had compartmentalized so deeply that she believed both realities could coexist without consequence. When she pressed closer, I could feel the warmth of her body through thin fabric, could smell the familiar mix of shampoo and skin, and every instinct screamed to either hold her or push her away, but I did neither. I simply let the moment pass over me like a wave, drowning me without leaving a trace. She whispered that she was nervous about tomorrow's presentation and that knowing I'd be there made her feel safe. The irony nearly choked me. I murmured, "I'll be right there," and she smiled sleepily, unaware that I meant something entirely different. Later, when she fell asleep with her hand resting on my chest, I stared at the ceiling and let the truth crystallize. This wasn't just about two coworkers sneaking around. This was about the slow erosion of trust, the quiet theft of intimacy, the deliberate choices she made to build something behind my back while still using me as her emotional home. And I realized with brutal clarity that the only way this could end was publicly, undeniably, with every layer of deception peeled back until there was nowhere left to hide. I wasn't just going to reveal an affair. I was going to dismantle a narrative. I was going to show everyone exactly who they really were. And in the morning, when I woke to the soft rhythm of her breathing against my shoulder, I knew I was ready to begin. I woke up before sunrise, not because I set an alarm, but because my mind refused to let me sleep any longer, and for a few seconds I just stared at the ceiling in the gray light, listening to the quiet breathing of the woman lying against my chest, the same woman who had whispered that I made her feel safe, while secretly calculating how to keep her other life hidden. And the weight of that contradiction settled over me like a sheet of ice that prevented anger from becoming chaos. Because today was not about emotions, today was about precision. I moved slowly as I got out of bed, careful not to wake her, and stood for a moment just watching her sleep, trying to understand how someone could look so peaceful after living such a split existence, wondering whether she even felt guilt anymore, or if she had convinced herself that what we had and what she had with Jason were two separate worlds, each justified in its own way. Her hand was still stretched toward the place I had been lying, like her body wanted me even if her loyalty didn't, and for the briefest moment I felt something dangerously close to pity, but I shut it down because pity had no place in what needed to happen next. In the kitchen, I made coffee the way we always did, 2 cups, hers slightly sweeter, mine darker, and the routine felt so normal it was almost grotesque, but I kept doing it anyway, because today I was playing the role of the husband she believed she still controlled. She came in half asleep, wearing one of my shirts, leaning against me for warmth like she always did, and I let her, because pretending everything was fine was just another layer of the trap being set. She asked if she looked presentable for the big day and twirled with a grin, and I told her she looked incredible, which was true in the most painful sense. She had always been stunning, both in appearance and in how effortlessly she could command a room, and that was part of what made the betrayal so cunning. People didn't question her. They admired her. She had built an image of competence and charm so strong that no one would ever believe she could be capable of this kind of deception unless they saw it with their own eyes. On the drive to the office, she was unusually talkative, going over the final points of the presentation, laughing about inside office jokes, even thanking me for being supportive through all the long nights and stress. I kept my responses calm and measured, because the more comfortable she felt, the cleaner the fall would be. When we arrived, she squeezed my hand before getting out of the car like we were still a team, and I let her fingers slide away slowly, feeling the last remnants of the life she thought she still had slipped through my grasp like sand, and I realized that by the end of the day, nothing would be left of this version of us. I headed to my office and opened the folder that contained every piece of evidence I had collected: videos, logs, timestamps, emails, travel overlaps, and the audio recording that still made my stomach twist even after hearing it repeatedly. I went through everything one more time with the same care I would use when debugging a critical system, making sure each file was labeled properly, each segment clipped to the exact second, each transition seamless, because when I presented this, there could be no loopholes, no ambiguity, no room for them to spin a story. I rehearsed the order in my mind. First the data overlap, then the badge access times, then the video clips from the break room and hallway, then the audio from the rehearsal mic. It was all so methodical it almost didn't feel personal, until I would glance at a frozen frame of Olivia smiling at Jason with that soft, affectionate gaze I thought belonged only to me, and the weight of it would slam into my chest like a physical blow. Around mid-morning, I walked the floor under the pretense of checking in with teams, but in reality, I was watching interactions like a scientist studying behavior. I noticed how easily Olivia and Jason moved around each other, brushing past one another with casual familiarity, how they shared those subtle glances that people dismiss as friendship if they don't know what to look for. I watched Mark, the department manager, hover near Olivia a few times, and I saw her body stiffen in a way that looked more like irritation than respect, and at first I thought it was just tension from the project, until I caught the way Mark's eyes followed her when she walked away, a possessive glint that made something click in the back of my mind. I remembered Jason yelling during their argument, "So you're also sleeping with our department manager?" At the time I thought it was just a line thrown in anger, but now I felt the possibility creeping in, the possibility that this went deeper than I realized. I forced myself not to dig into that yet, one betrayal at a time, but a seed had been planted, and I knew I would have to revisit it soon. For now, I focused on preparation. I confirmed with the AV team that my segment was still scheduled, and they assured me everything was in place for the all-hands after lunch. I checked the tech setup myself, pretending to be overly cautious about latency issues, but what I was really doing was making sure the audio was clear and the screen transitions were fast. No one questioned it because I had always been known for being meticulous, maybe even obsessive when it came to presentations. They thought this was just me being me. They had no idea it was me sharpening the blade. Right before lunch, Olivia found me in the hallway, slid her arms around my waist, and pressed her forehead to my chest in a brief moment of vulnerability. "I'm glad you're with me today," she murmured. "I feel braver when you're in the room." I felt something break inside me, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, final snap, like the last thread giving way. I placed my hand gently on the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair, and I said, "I know. I'll be right beside you." And I meant it, just not the way she thought. Because in just a few hours, I wasn't going to be her comfort. I was going to be her mirror, and she was finally going to see herself the way I did, without illusion. Lunch felt like the last calm breath before a storm, the kind of quiet that fools everyone into thinking nothing is coming. And the cafeteria buzzed with easy conversation while Olivia and Jason sat 2 tables away from me with the rest of their team, laughing about something I couldn't hear but could feel in the way Jason leaned just an inch too close, and Olivia's smile softened the way it only did when she felt completely safe. It was infuriating how normal everything looked, how perfectly they wore the mask of professionalism, and I understood in that moment why no one ever suspected them. Because true deception doesn't look messy, it looks seamless, like a well-choreographed dance where every step feels natural. People kept coming up to me, asking about my segment for the all hands, assuming it would be another one of my grounded, data-heavy breakdowns on workflow optimization or how accountability improves efficiency. I nodded and made small talk, hiding a plan so catastrophic behind a calm expression that it almost felt like a performance in itself. And in a twisted way, it was. I wasn't going on stage to present. I was going on stage to dismantle an illusion. When the announcement came for everyone to start heading to the auditorium, I walked beside Olivia, and she slipped her hand into mine with such genuine ease that I almost forgot to breathe. "You're going to be amazing," I told her, and she smiled up at me like I was her anchor, completely unaware that I was the one pulling the ground out from under her. She went ahead to sit with her team while I slipped backstage with the AV crew under the pretext of loading my slides. I triple-checked the file, efficiency_metrics_final. PPTX. The most harmless name possible for the most destructive presentation I had ever built. The AV tech asked if I needed any adjustments, and I smiled and said everything was perfect, and he moved on without a second thought. I tested the audio with a short, meaningless sentence and listened through the headset to make sure the playback was crisp. It was flawless. The footage, the badge logs, the mic recording, it would all be loud enough for the back row to hear every breath. One by one, speakers took the stage. The CEO gave his usual polished update. The product lead showed market projections. The department manager, Mark, gave an overly enthusiastic speech about strengthening trust and collaboration, and I almost laughed out loud at the irony, because in less than an hour his own reputation would be collateral damage in a war he didn't even know he was losing. But I stayed focused, every sense heightened as I waited for my turn. When Olivia stood to present her project alongside Jason, the room leaned in with eager attention. She spoke with confidence and grace, her voice steady, her logic sharp, the audience hanging on every word. I watched her, and for a fleeting second, I remembered the pride I used to feel seeing her succeed. That version of us could have had everything. But that version died the moment she chose someone else in secret. She finished to applause, and Jason added his final remarks with his signature charm, looking out at the crowd like he already saw his promotion on the horizon. The CEO stood and congratulated them both, and then said, "And now, Ethan will walk us through some insights on process accountability." That was my cue. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to the stage with steady steps. Olivia caught my eye and gave me a confident nod, trusting me completely. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms folded, relaxed. Mark scrolled his phone, uninterested. The CEO handed me the mic, and I thanked him. Then I clicked to my first slide, an innocuous title, "The Cost of Hidden Inefficiencies." The audience settled in, expecting a typical analysis. Perfect. I started calm, walking through a few graphs about time losses and overlapping resources, gently easing them into the concept of patterns beneath the surface. Then, slowly, I guided them deeper, cross-team discrepancies, unusual badge access times, off-hours collaboration that bypassed official channels. I spoke in long, even sentences, the tone of someone unveiling a problem that had been quietly draining productivity. People leaned forward. They were hooked, but not yet alarmed. Then I said, "Patterns don't lie. People do." The room froze. I clicked to the next slide. Timestamped badge log showing Olivia and Jason entering restricted areas late at night together. A few eyebrows raised. I explained calmly that this went beyond normal workflow. Another click. Expense reports showing overlapping travel. Then, a quick fade into a still image. Olivia and Jason in the empty break room. Too close, touching in a way colleagues don't. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Olivia shot upright, eyes wide. Jason's relaxed posture vanished. Mark looked up from his phone, suddenly alert. I didn't look at them. I stayed locked on the crowd. "We cannot build accountability," I said, "when certain individuals hide personal relationships that compromise professional integrity." I clicked again. The hallway footage appeared, Olivia checking her phone with that smile. Jason entering, their bodies angling toward one another with the kind of ease that only comes from familiarity. Someone in the back gasped. Olivia stood abruptly, her voice sharp. "Ethan, what are you doing?" I ignored her and kept speaking, because this was no longer a presentation. This was truth. When two people form a secret alliance, it affects team dynamics, trust, resource allocation. "Stop this," she snapped, stepping toward the stage. "We'll talk privately." I finally turned and looked directly at her. "No," I said. "We won't." Then I clicked to the final slide. The audio file started playing, Jason's voice. "Baby, last night was unreal." And then Olivia's voice. "If Ethan walks in, we're finished." The room exploded into silence, so heavy it felt like gravity changed. Olivia's face went white. Jason looked ready to run. Mark's head dropped into his hands. I let the audio play in full. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, everyone in that room finally saw the truth. And none of them would ever unsee it. Silence is louder than screaming when an entire room runs out of excuses at the same time, and the moment that recording ended, the air felt heavy enough to choke on. No one moved. No one blinked. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. Olivia stood in the aisle between the rows of chairs, her lips parted like she couldn't decide whether to beg or deny, and Jason was frozen in his seat, eyes wide, every muscle in his body coiled, as if he was calculating the best exit. Mark, the department manager who had been scrolling his phone moments before, had his head in his hands, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor in a way that told me one important thing. He wasn't shocked. He was cornered. And that realization hit the room like a second impact, even though no one had spoken the words aloud yet. I let the silence stretch for several long, painful seconds, because silence forces people to think. Silence forces people to see what they would rather ignore. Then I said, calm and steady, "This is what happens when trust is treated like a resource to abuse instead of a foundation to build on." My voice carried clearly through every speaker in the auditorium. No shaking, no rage, just truth. Raw, measured, final. Olivia broke first. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and desperation. "We can talk about this privately. Not here. Not like this." Her eyes were glossy, like she was begging me to be the man she believed I still was, soft, forgiving, too loyal to ever destroy her image. But that man had died the moment I heard her whisper my name like a thread in someone else's arms. "You already had plenty of time to talk," I replied, and the words came out colder than I expected. "You chose to lie. I chose to prove." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else muttered, "Is this real?" The CEO, who had always prided himself on maintaining control, stood slowly with a face that looked carved from stone. He began to speak, but Jason shot out of his seat, pointing at me like a cornered animal. "This is a violation of privacy," he shouted. "You can't just. This is illegal. He hacked something. This is defamation." His voice cracked near the end, and I could see the shift happen across the audience. Sympathy died. The more he yelled, the guiltier he looked. I didn't even have to respond. The truth was louder than anything he could say. "I'll handle this," the CEO said tightly, motioning for Jason to sit down. Jason hesitated, then sank slowly back into his seat, red-faced and shaking his head as if the world had betrayed him instead of the other way around. Olivia still stood frozen, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She didn't yell. She didn't deny. She just looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not even guilt. It was fear, real fear, the kind that comes when someone finally understands they have no more leverage. But the room wasn't done shifting yet, because while all eyes were on Olivia and Jason, I watched Mark, the supposedly composed department manager, stand up from his seat with the slow realization of a man who knows the fall is coming for him too. He didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't even look at me. He just walked toward the exit like someone leaving the scene of a crash he helped cause, but couldn't control. That movement didn't go unnoticed. Heads turned. People whispered. The CEO's gaze snapped to him, not confused, but suspicious. Because people don't walk out of rooms like that unless they have something to hide. And that's when twist number one finally stepped into the light. Not because I announced it, but because Olivia, crumbling under the pressure, let it slip. This isn't just me. She blurted out, voice cracking. You don't understand. This isn't fair. Jason's eyebrows shot up. What does that mean? He demanded. But Olivia turned, eyes locking on Mark like a drowning person grabbing onto the only thing left to pull down with them. You said we were safe, she hissed. You promised no one would find out. The room erupted in gasps so loud it felt like a physical wave rolling forward through the rows of chairs. The CEO froze mid-step. His eyes narrowed with razor-sharp clarity. Mark, he said slowly, what is she talking about? Mark didn't answer, because there was no answer that would save him. I watched him, and in that instant, everything confirmed itself. The extra budget approvals Olivia got without question, the private meetings that never showed up on calendars, the tension in her voice when his name came up. She hadn't just been betraying me with one coworker. She had been playing an entire hierarchy. Jason was just the distraction. Mark was the real leverage. Jason realized it a split second later, and the look he gave Olivia was pure betrayal. You were with him too? He snarled, his voice breaking under the weight of humiliation. Are you kidding me? He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair as he stood again. I ruined my life for you, and you were. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The story had already rewritten itself in everyone's minds. Olivia tried to speak, but her voice dissolved into a choked sound that didn't even resemble words. She looked at me like I was her last lifeline. I didn't look back. The CEO stepped forward, eyes flicking between the three of them. All of you. My office. Now. But no one stood. No one moved. The audience wasn't done watching. They didn't want to miss a single second of this collapse. And honestly, neither did I. Jason turned on Mark like a storm. You said she was done with him. He shouted, pointing toward me. You told me. Another unfinished sentence. More truth slipping through. More damage. Mark finally spoke, low and sharp. Shut your mouth before you make this worse. Worse. Jason snapped. My career is over, and you're worried about worse? You manipulated both of us. That was it. The final spark. The audience didn't just see an affair. They saw a power play. A manager exploiting his position. A team lead crossing boundaries. A wife orchestrating it all. And in the middle of the chaos, I stood there calm, still holding the clicker, no longer needing to say another word. Because the most satisfying revenge isn't delivered by screaming. It's delivered by truth so undeniable that it makes your enemies destroy each other without you lifting a finger. And in that moment, I could already see it happening. They weren't just falling apart. They were turning on each other. The room dissolved into chaos, but not the kind with shouting and chairs flipping. This was the quiet, terrifying kind where reputations collapsed in slow motion while everyone watched. The CEO's face was unreadable, but his silence was more dangerous than anger. HR was already at the side of the room, whispering urgently into headsets. A few executives slipped out the back, no doubt preparing damage control. Olivia stood at the center like a shattered glass statue, trembling, eyes red but unblinking, desperately trying to calculate a way to fix something that could no longer be saved. Jason paced in tight circles, running a shaking hand through his hair, whispering curses under his breath as if waking from a nightmare he created himself. Mark stood rigid, arms crossed, jaw clenched, pretending to be composed while every muscle screamed panic. They were no longer allies. They were trapped animals in the same cage, each realizing that survival meant betrayal of the others. The CEO finally spoke, low and cold. All three of you, follow me, now. But Olivia didn't move. She turned to me instead, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, please, don't let them destroy me. It stunned me, not because she was pleading, but because she looked at me like I was still the one person who might save her. She still believed I was soft. She still believed I loved her enough to intervene. Maybe once, that would have been true. But that version of me was gone. So I held her gaze and said nothing. That silence did more damage than any words could. Her breath hitched, her shoulders lowered, and I saw the moment she finally understood. I wasn't going to save her. I was the one who put her here. Jason stepped forward, eyes wild. We can fix this. We'll say it was a misunderstanding. We'll tell them the audio was taken out of context. He looked around like he expected people to nod. No one did. If anything, the audience seemed disgusted. A woman from finance muttered, pathetic. A guy from Dev scoffed out loud. Jason's confidence wilted. He looked at Olivia for support, but she was staring at the floor. He looked at Mark, but Mark had already stepped toward the exit, distancing himself. That's when the shift happened. Jason's humiliation twisted into rage. You think you're better than me? He snapped at Mark. You're twice her age, and you were doing the same thing. Gasps rippled through the room. Mark spun around, eyes burning. Watch it. But Jason didn't stop. He pointed at Olivia. She played both of us. She used your influence and my work. She's the reason all of this happened. Olivia's head jerked up, eyes wide. How dare you, how dare I? Jason interrupted with a sharp laugh. You told me you loved me. You told him the same, didn't you? His arm shot toward me like a weapon. You were never going to leave him. You were just collecting power. And there it was. The truth behind the truth. It wasn't just infidelity. It was strategy, manipulation. Olivia hadn't fallen into an affair. She had engineered multiple relationships for emotional, professional, and social leverage. And the worst part? I could see in her face that even now, part of her didn't think she had done anything that terrible. She genuinely believed she deserved to be adored, protected, promoted. She believed she was entitled. Mark rubbed his temples like he had a migraine. Enough, he muttered. This conversation is over. But the room had already turned on him. Someone whispered. He knew. Another said. He covered for them. The CEO's eyes darkened. Mark, he said slowly, we need to speak. Privately. Before I decide whether to call legal. Mark stiffened. Legal. That word landed like a hammer. The CEO didn't threaten lawsuits unless something was serious, very serious. Olivia began to cry quietly, covering her mouth with her hands. Jason sank into a chair, head in his palms. They looked broken. And for a moment, I just stood there and let it wash over me. But then something shifted inside me. I wondered if this was enough. Exposing them. Watching them fall. Would it fix the emptiness? Would it give me back the years I put into loving someone who used me as a prop while building a secret life behind my back? No, it wouldn't. But it still mattered. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was closure in the only form that truly ends things. Truth with consequences. The CEO turned back to me, his voice measured. Ethan, did you know? I met his eyes. I found the first piece of evidence during the project rehearsal. I confirmed everything quietly. I didn't want to cause chaos. I wanted to protect the integrity of the team. He nodded slowly. He believed me. More importantly, everyone in that room believed me. They saw me not as a bitter husband, but as someone who exposed a disease in the system. Someone who protected them without dragging them into it. Someone who did the right thing the right way. The CEO exhaled. Go back to your seat. We'll handle the rest. But before I stepped down, he added, and for what it's worth, you handled this with more restraint than most people could. That hit harder than I expected. Not praise. Respect. Real, earned respect. I walked off stage. Olivia reached out as I passed, fingertips brushing the air between us like she wanted to grab me. I kept walking. She flinched like I'd struck her. I didn't look back. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not happy. Not relieved. Just free of something I didn't even realize I had been carrying. The room buzzed with quiet, stunned energy as I took my seat. A few coworkers gave me small nods of support. Someone patted my shoulder. No one said, I'm sorry. They didn't need to. Their silence was solidarity. As the CEO led Olivia, Jason, and Mark out of the auditorium, I realized something with brutal clarity. This was only the beginning. There would be HR investigations, legal inquiries, possibly police involvement, reputations destroyed, careers ended, and eventually, divorce papers. But all of that would come later. In this moment, staring at the door they disappeared through, I finally understood the deepest satisfaction of revenge. It isn't the explosion. It's the echo that follows. And I knew theirs was just beginning. HR sealed off the conference room like a quarantine zone, and the rest of the day felt like watching the aftermath of an earthquake. Papers scattered, doors slamming, people speaking in hushed voices while pretending to focus on their screens. The whole building tense with the realization that the story spreading through the halls wasn't gossip, it was history. I didn't go back to my office right away. I sat in the lobby, staring at nothing, letting my mind catch up to what had just happened. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, but what I actually felt was quiet. Not peace, not guilt, just the absence of weight. Years of unseen tension had finally snapped, and the silence that replaced it felt almost unfamiliar. But the company moved quickly. By the time the sun started to sink behind the windows, emails had gone out scheduling mandatory professional conduct meetings. HR reps in suits walked briskly down corridors like emergency responders. I saw Jason escorted out first, flanked by security, not because he was dangerous, but because this company cared more about appearances than anything. He looked hollow, eyes unfocused, shoulders slumped. The golden boy, publicly dismantled. Some people watched with pity, others with satisfaction, everyone with shock. An hour later, they walked Olivia out. She wasn't in handcuffs. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She walked with her head high, but her eyes were empty. Like someone who finally understood the consequences, but still couldn't believe they applied to her. When she saw me standing near the elevator bank, she hesitated. The security guards paused too, maybe thinking she needed a moment. She stepped closer, voice soft and shaky. "Ethan, please. Can we just talk?" There was no arrogance this time. No manipulation. Just raw desperation. For a second, a part of me, the part that still remembered the warmth of her sleeping against my chest, almost said yes. But then I remembered every lie she told while looking me in the eye. Every time she used me as a shield while building intimacy with someone else. Every touch, every smile, every "I love you" spoken with another man's name on her tongue. I met her gaze, steady. "We'll talk when lawyers are present." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "You don't mean that." "I do." Her composure cracked. "You can't let them destroy me." That line. That familiar self-centered plea. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I hurt you." Just fear of consequences. "I didn't destroy you," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." Her lips trembled. "I still love you." For the first time, I didn't feel anything. No pain, no longing, no anger. Just clarity. Love doesn't look like what you did. Security gestured. She stared at me one last time. Some mix of heartbreak, disbelief, and something darker, like resentment. Then turned and walked away. Without me. Forever. I expected to feel victorious watching her go. Instead, I felt done. Later that evening, Mark was taken out a separate entrance. No security, just two executives and an HR director. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't fight. He knew this was the end. Rumors spread that the board was already discussing legal exposure and whether his actions warranted termination with cause, which meant no severance, no references, and likely public consequences. People whispered about lawsuits, ethics violations, hidden favoritism. By morning, the entire department would know. And they would remember. I stayed late, reviewing my own files, answering messages from coworkers who didn't say much but sent quiet gestures of support. "You did the right thing." That was brave. "If you need anything, I'm here." It meant more than I expected, because even though I had gone through this alone, I wasn't ending it alone. When the office finally emptied and the building quieted, I walked through the halls slowly, taking in the silence. No more uneasy smiles. No more pretending everything was fine. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was living someone else's lie. I gathered my things and headed to the elevator, just as the CO came around the corner. "Ethan," he said, stopping me. "Got a minute?" Technically, I didn't. Emotionally, I had a lifetime. We stepped into his office. He closed the door gently. He didn't sit at his desk. He stood in front of it, arms folded, studying me the way he studied financial projections. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he said. "Today was a disaster for the company." I nodded. "I know, but it was a necessary one." I looked up. "That, I didn't expect." He exhaled. "You didn't embarrass us." "They did. You didn't hurt the team. You protected it. If you hadn't uncovered this, it would have kept spreading like a cancer." He paused. "You have my respect." Coming from him, that wasn't just praise, that was currency. I nodded once. "Thank you." He leaned against his desk, thoughtful. "I'm restructuring leadership. I need someone I can trust to stabilize the department." I stayed silent. He looked me dead in the eye. "I want you to take over as team lead. Effective immediately." The words landed with a weight I hadn't felt all day. Not excitement. Not pride. Just validation. Not of the revenge. Of the person I had been before all this. The one who built things with integrity, who led with logic, who believed in people until they gave him a reason not to. I had thought that version of me was gone. But maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just buried under betrayal. I'll do it, I said. He nodded, satisfied. Good. HR will send the paperwork tomorrow. Take a few days if you need it. I shook my head. I'd rather start now. His mouth curved slightly, approval. Then go home. Get some rest. The real rebuilding starts tomorrow. I walked out of his office and down the hallway. My reflection in the glass doors looked tired. Changed, but not broken. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the city alive around me. Olivia was gone. Jason was gone. Mark was gone. The lies were gone. And for the first time, revenge didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning. The next few weeks felt like waking up in a familiar house after an earthquake. Everything looked almost the same, but nothing was in the same place anymore. People at work were quieter around me at first, unsure whether I was fragile or furious. But the more I showed up, steady and composed, the more they relaxed and started treating me like a leader rather than a victim. HR investigations continued in the background like a constant storm siren, but I wasn't in the path of destruction anymore. I was the one helping rebuild. Olivia, Jason, and Mark were officially terminated within days. Legal actions followed. The board released a carefully worded statement about violations of professional conduct and abuse of position. I didn't need them to name names. Everyone already knew. And while there was gossip at first, it didn't last long, because the company culture shifted sharply. People started working cleaner, communicating more honestly, holding each other accountable. It was as if exposing their betrayal had disinfected the entire system. In some twisted way, my personal disaster saved the department. At home, the silence felt different too. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences without writing an essay about the truth. I didn't need the court to punish her. Life already had. Word got around that Olivia had tried to find work in the same industry, but no one wanted the risk. She had become a cautionary tale. I heard she moved back to her sister's place temporarily, then tried to negotiate a settlement that included part of our home. My lawyer didn't even blink. The judge took one look at the evidence and awarded me the house, most of the assets, and a clean exit. No alimony. No shared debts. She walked away with almost nothing. When she realized it was final, she showed up at the house one last time to collect her things. I wasn't there. I left the key under the mat to avoid seeing her, but she left a note on the kitchen counter, 2 lines. I never meant to hurt you. You were the only real thing I ever had. I stared at the handwriting for a long time, and the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I just felt done. So I threw the note away with the rest of the trash. Healing wasn't instant. Pain doesn't disappear just because justice was served. There were nights I lay awake wondering how many moments of my life had been real and how many had been performance. There were mornings I reached for a second coffee mug before remembering I only needed one. But over time, those reflexes faded. I started rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten. Early morning runs, late-night gaming sessions, cooking meals because I wanted to, not because it was expected. I caught myself laughing more. I caught myself breathing deeper. I started to feel like a person again instead of a placeholder in someone else's story. Work evolved too. As team lead, I rebuilt processes from the ground up, installed transparency where there had been secrecy, created a space where people could speak honestly without fear. Productivity soared. Morale improved. For the first time, I walked into meetings and felt pride instead of dread. The CEO trusted me. My team respected me. I wasn't just filling a role, I was shaping something better. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The very thing that nearly destroyed me had put me in the position I had worked years to deserve. Not because I played dirty, but because I refused to. Months passed. One crisp Friday afternoon, the CEO called me into his office again. I half expected another crisis, but instead he smiled. We're expanding. I'm forming a new strategic division, he said. I want you to run it. For a second, I just stared. You're serious? Dead serious, he said. You've proven you can build trust, structure, and results. You're exactly the kind of leader this company needs more of. I shook his hand, and as I walked out, I realized something. Revenge hadn't made me powerful. Integrity had. That night, on my way out of the office, I ran into someone new. A woman from another department I'd only spoken to once before, Emily. She had transferred in shortly after everything blew up. Sharp, calm, kind eyes. She smiled as we stepped into the elevator together. Long day, she asked. Long month, I said with a half laugh. She didn't pry. She didn't make it awkward. She just nodded with understanding. As we reached the lobby, she paused before walking to her car. Ethan, I turned. Yeah. She hesitated only a second. I heard what happened. Not all the details. Just enough. I braced myself for pity, but she didn't offer any. Instead, she said, some people break and make everyone else pay for it. You didn't. You rebuilt. That says everything. Then she walked away with a soft smile that felt like fresh air. I stood there a moment longer, watching her go, and something unfamiliar unfolded quietly in my chest. Not love, not infatuation, something simpler. Possibility. The realization that maybe, after everything, I wasn't just surviving, I was ready to live again. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when it happened, it wouldn't be built on illusion. It would be real. As I locked up my office and stepped outside into the cool night, I looked up at the sky and exhaled slowly. The storm had passed. The wreckage was gone. The dust had settled. And beneath it all, I found something I thought I had lost forever. Myself.